Okay. So strategies for equitable grading is something that we've been doing a lot of focus on recently, but it's not necessarily anything new. A lot of the information and experience that went into this workshop is based on experiences I've had supporting departments, specifically in the implementation of these types of strategies. What you're looking at on the screen is a comparison of the 100-point scale and the 5-point scale. And the 5-point scale is something that's been used by some instructors and some departments already at PCC. Notably, the art department at Cascade campus had asked me to help them set up the 5-point scale for them. Probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. I don't remember exactly how long it's been, but that's kind of been the primary sort of pilot to this scale, but I know other instructors in other departments have used it as well. So the concept between for equitable grading is that the traditional 100-point scale with A through F, skipping E, is a system that gives students a significant amount of room to fail. You basically have 70 points worth of possible failure for the students. Whereas a 5-point scale, you divide it into 5 evenly dispersed 20-point groupings. And basically a C, which is passing grade, which is the yellow box here, is the earliest possible number of points for them to achieve a passing grade. And so they basically, instead of having 70 points or 70% opportunity to fail in the traditional 100-point scale, you have 60% of the possible points in a 5-point scale to succeed. So it's kind of flipping the scale on its head so that you have more opportunities to succeed than fail. What this actually looks like in any individual class may vary significantly, and there may be some variance based on the program. If you have a program that has certain requirements, you may not be able to implement this exactly as demonstrated. So I would recommend contacting an ITS, instructional technology specialist, to help you figure out how to implement your own custom version of this, but I'm going to be demonstrating specifically this 5-point scale. So to get started, we're going to go to the grade book. I already have some examples in here that will make it easy to demonstrate, but specifically what I'd like to go over is the setup wizard, just some recommendations. So I'm going to be doing a point system. You can do this with a weighting system, but it is more difficult to set up. And there's a lot of nuance to that. So I'm not going to be covering that in great detail, if at all, unless there are questions at the end that we want to go over that, and if we have time. But we're going to do a point system. I generally don't recommend a formula system because that's pretty ugly with the math. For the final grade release, this is something that I recommend regardless of what kind of grading system you're using. If you release the calculated final grade, then the students can see what their current total grade is in the class immediately whenever a new grade gets entered. If you switch it to adjusted final grade, you have to manually put something in for them to be able to see like a midterm grade or an earlier grade in the class for what the current final grade is. So I usually recommend doing calculated final grade. If you want to adjust your grades later, you can do that at the end of the term. You can switch from calculated to adjusted, but I would recommend always keeping it on calculated and automatically released. The only reason you wouldn't want to do that is if you are planning on doing some kind of adjustment. It's rare, but I know some instructors who will do grade scaling and stuff like that. So they will want to put adjusted final grade because they don't want to freak their students out by how low some of their grades appear until they're adjusted. And then this is the other one. Basically, you have drop ungraded items, which treats anything that's not been turned in as if it's not a part of the grade calculation yet. And that is what I recommend, because the alternative, treat ungraded items at 0, basically starts students out at a 0 grade and makes them build up to a passing grade. And it's kind of a daunting experience for a lot of students. We've gotten feedback on this. The students are concerned that they turned in the first assignment and got an A on it, but they only have 10% of the credit in the class. And while that is an accurate point of view for what their total grade is, if they stopped participating immediately, it's not something that is great for their perspective when they're looking at how well am I currently doing. So I do recommend drop ungraded items rather than treat ungraded items at 0. The caveat is with drop ungraded items, you need to make sure that you enter zeros for anything that doesn't get turned in. I'm going to skip through the rest of the settings. This is something we're going to cover later, is the default grade scheme. And I'm just going to click through to save our settings. Okay. And so now what I want to demonstrate is the creation of a 5-point grade scheme. I already have one in here, so I'm going to create a second one. So what I'm going to do is in the grades area, you want to click on grade schemes. Now, this is all in reflection of preparation I've already done in advance of this workshop. By default, you will only have this percentage organization scheme, grade scheme in this on this page. So you'll have to add these manually, and you might have to get assistance from us if you want to implement these and run into any kind of trouble. So I'm going to create a new scheme and I'm going to give it a name. The name is important to you. It needs to be something that you recognize. So like I'm just going to call it a 5-point scale. Spell it properly. And I'm going to do consistent capitalization. The short name field is sort of silly. I don't know why they even have it for this, because it's just never come up. I've never seen anybody actually use the short name field, but it's basically just for doing like IPS. We can do a shorter version of it if you want. So the significant thing about the ranges is that you start with the lower range values and then go to the higher range values. The symbol is whatever you want to call the grade that a student can achieve. And this can be used for great customization. In a 5-point scale, it's pretty obvious that we just start with 1, 2, 3, and we can click here and say, we want to add 2 more ranges. And so we're going to add 4 and 5. But you can do other customized schemes, and you can have the symbol reflect something different. You can make this an F if you wanted to, and you can do a traditional scheme like that. You can do A pluses and A minuses if you wanted to do that. That is something that I've helped some other instructors do. But since we don't really have final grades that are A pluses or minuses or anything like that, then I don't really find that of much value. But for instance, if you want like a complete incomplete, you can do a custom grade scheme with just 2 ranges. One is incomplete and one is complete, and I'll demonstrate that in a few minutes. But for now, what we're going to do is we're going to do this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 5-point scale. The starting percent is what is the lowest possible points that you can get to achieve this particular grade. And so in this respect, what we can do is we can say 21, 41, 61, and 81. This could also be 20, 40, 60, and 80, but I'm setting it to this because I'm going to demonstrate the assigned value at set levels. And I will get into why we're doing that in one moment. So with the percentage, basically what this means is once the student surpasses this point, they will achieve this grade. And then when they get to the next one, obviously they achieve the next one, which is pretty simple as a concept. The assigned value percentage confuses people typically because they don't understand what it's for. And Unfortunately, D2L doesn't have a label that tells you exactly the purpose of this, but if you look it up, the assigned value percentage is for the purpose of using a select box as a grading or as a grade item type. So the select box is specifically one in which, rather than typing in a number to achieve a certain grade over here, you're actually just selecting one of these grades and it's assigning this grade this percentage. So it's saying if you get a 1 on an assignment, it's basically saying you're getting 20%. If you get a 5, you get 100%, that sort of thing. So instead of putting in you got a 67, which qualifies you for a 4, it just rounds it to a certain number, and that's what the assigned value percentage is. Technically, these can be anything, but you want them to correspond to what you are kind of conceive of your grades as being a division of points. Grade scheme color is completely up to you. You can use the existing grade schemes that D2L defaults to. I tend to like that because these initial 5 colors after the blank white one are less bold, and I think the subtle colors are nicer. You can choose like a big bold red, but that kind of looks alarming with how bold it is. So you do this sort of soft pink, this very peachy orange, light yellow, light green, light sort of lavender blue. And pretty much that is the extent of creating a custom 5-point grade scale. Now you'll note that there is no 0. You're not starting at 0 with this scale. I've done a version of this for some other instructors where they wanted a 0 to 4, where 0 is actually the starting point and the lowest score you can get. That's really up to you. I think the 1 to 5 makes sense for students better. 0 to 4 kind of makes me think of my background in computer science, computer information systems, where you start counting from 0. But that is not as familiar to students, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. So we're going to go ahead and save and close this one. And so that's just a different one. So what we're next going to look at is this default scheme versus set as default. The set as default column is confusing to people the first time they look at it, because they're like, what does this mean? And basically what they don't understand is these little gray check marks are actually buttons, and you click this to set something as the default grade scheme. Now you don't want to do that if you're only using a custom grade scheme for a few assignments, but the majority of your assignments will be percentage based or something like that. If you are doing 1 to 5 point scale assignments throughout your entire class, then you would want to set one as the default. So if you choose this, you set it as the default, and this defaults back to over here. What that means is that any grade item that is set to being a default scheme will suddenly switch to the 5-point scale, and any new grade item that you create will default to that as the selected option. You can always manually choose a percentage, or you can manually choose a complete incomplete, but you do have to choose a default scheme if you want something to be different than the percentage. I'm actually going to switch it to this one because this is the one that I already pre-prepared. And then looking at another example of a custom grade scheme, I'm going to show you the complete incomplete. So this one is binary. It's literally just a 0 or a 1. And the assigned value is either 0% or 100%. Incomplete and complete. You can, again, customize these terms. So if you want it to be not finished or not started, achieved and not yet achieved, you can word it however you like. But this is great for a simple way of checking off that somebody's done something that you don't need to provide any kind of scaled evaluation. So this is a really nice one for those situations. And now I want to show you what this looks like in practice. So you have options for grade types when you create grades. So I'm going to go to Manage Grades, and I'm going to hit New to create a new grade item. And what you're going to see as your first option is what grade item type do you choose? Now, the default tends to be numeric. However, when you have a custom grade scheme, you are able to use a select box. And this is specifically why I was using that, that percentage column on the far right of the custom grade schemes. Because if you don't have a custom grade scheme, select box will not be an option because the default percentage doesn't let you use a select box. But we can choose a select box as a grade item type now that we have a custom grade scheme available. And I'm going to call this one assignment 4. And I will call it A4 as a short name. And we're going to do a 5-point scale. And since I had selected the 1 to 5 point scale as the default, it automatically shows up here as the option. The other thing that you'll notice is that, once again, percentage is not available because I chose a select box type. It's not going to give me the option to do the percentage grade scheme. Everything else I don't really need to worry about, with the exception of override display options. So this can be important if you want students to see specific information, which is to say, I don't want them to see the points grades because I want them to see my custom grade labels. So I want them to see the 1 through 5 that I've done for the names of the grades that they're getting. I don't want them to see that it corresponds to another thing, another grade item or grade number. That's not really a concern in this case. I'm sort of being overly cautious in a scenario where it doesn't apply, because the 1.5 scale or 1 to 5 scale is only those 5 possible points. But it's actually important, especially if you do like a complete incomplete, because it's going to show you either that 0 or that 100% or whatever. And maybe you don't want to show them the numbers. You just want to show them what the status is as to whether or not they've achieved that or not. So I'm going to go ahead and save and close. And so with that select box, the nice thing is that this makes it really easy. I'm not going to go through the assignments to grade something. I could if I wanted to. I'm just going to manually grade it here. But it's functionally the same when it comes to entering the grade, which is the part that we're focusing on. So since I chose a select box, all of my students have just this option of which grade did they achieve. And so when I'm evaluating a student's assignment, I can say, okay, Carrie got a 5, Michael got a 4, and this version of Michael didn't do so well, and we're going to give him a 2. And I'm going to, and if you wanted to, you could add feedback, etc. But I'm just going to go ahead and save and close. And so we have those grades showing up here with the grade scheme that I created. From the student perspective, I will impersonate myself. We're going to do the student that's not doing so well and look at the grade book. And so we have the 2 with the, it's very dim, but there's the background color to it for assignment 4. We have the complete and complete that I've already created prior to this workshop. So you get to see the complete rather than the number. So students can see the amount that you want them to see. So you'll notice with the assignment 3 with Rubric, I have the default percentage as the grade scheme for that, which is why it looks like this, and I haven't graded anything for the student. But this is what looks different than, for instance, the complete and complete, where I overrode the display option, so the students are only seeing what I want them to see, which is the status. They don't need to see if they got a 65% or a 27%. It doesn't really matter, because they're not seeing the points. They're only seeing the actual grade that I assigned to them. That's not going to be a lot of information for the students, though. So the next thing that I'm going to demonstrate is rubrics, specifically in relation to this. So I have a grade item, assignment 3 with Rubric, And what that looks like from the student perspective is when you have a rubric set up and attached to a grade item or an assignment, they get to see that before they actually turn in the assignment. And this is a great way of making sure students know that what they're being graded on. So I have this rubric, which is one that I helped an art instructor create, reflecting their 5-point scores. And so the criteria are listed out. They have 4 different criteria worth 5 points each, and students know what they're being graded on. And so then they can turn it in the assignment, add a file, et cetera, and the instructor gets to evaluate that. So I'm going to look at my rubric. Okay. So when setting up a rubric like this, for instance, the 5-point scale, there are different ways of doing it. It's just about making sure that the math comes out equal to the way that you want it to be displayed. So for instance, this scale makes all of the categories worth a total of 5 possible points. And that means that you're going to have 4 times 5 is 20. So you're going to have 20 possible points. And then you have to tell the grade item, but I'm only doing it out of 5. So it's going to divide that up into 5 points. You can do this another way if you want to. It's confusing for people who don't like the math part, but you can do 1.25, 1, 0.75, 0.5, and 0.25. And the thing that's confusing about that is, why would you choose those particular options? It's because there are 4 categories and there's 5 total possible points that I want for the entire assignment. And so 1.25 is 1/4 of 5. So it's saying that each one is 1/4 of the total possible points for the assignment. Again, it doesn't matter if you choose this version or if you want to do the simple 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 option. I'd recommend this actually just because it's easier for the students to see the 5 points. They don't understand the 1.25 either. But like I said, it's just a matter of making sure that you understand the math and how it comes out, so that you're actually achieving the grade system that you're looking for. So this rubric is all set to go. And so if I want to grade a student, then I can go to the grade book, enter grades, and then I can actually assess them. Obviously, this isn't the normal way that you would grade it. You'd want to go to the assignment view, but we're just going to go ahead and fill this out here. So you get to very easily choose the levels that you want, and it automatically figures out where somebody is in the calculation. So it's a great tool for ease of grading, and it's all just in the preparation in advance. I'm not going to go ahead and save that. We're going to move on because I want to demonstrate for you the complete incomplete. So this one is even simpler, where when you're grading with the select box or with a numeric binary of just 1s and 0s, it's very easy to just enter a 1 or a 0, which indicates whether they got it complete or incomplete. And that's it. So I didn't choose a select box for this one, but I could have. You can't change it after you've already entered grades. So if I want to demonstrate that as a select box, I'd have to create a new one and call it and make it binary. And this is the part a lot of people will forget, is just to do the override of the display. Sometimes you don't want them to see the color, so maybe remove that. And then when we're back in grades, it's just a simple select box where you get to choose whether it's complete or incomplete. Something that I recommend when you're doing this, if you are grading an assignment where most students have achieved the same level, especially on an incomplete, complete binary kind of grade item, is you can actually just select everybody and you can set a grade for everyone to complete. And then if you have one person who didn't do it, then you can just go back and change that one person. That way you're saving yourself a lot of time not having to manually choose each select box for everyone. So something like that is a great time saver when you have 25 people in the class or more, even especially if you're doing like a cross-listed course. So that is the extent of creating the 5-point scale as far as custom grade schemes are concerned, and demonstrating the rubrics. What else we have to talk about is the option to anonymize grading. So this is something that you can set up in an assignment where when you create a new assignment, you have the option of making it so that the grading is anonymous. Now, the thing that you have to be aware of is that the anonymous setting means that you cannot revoke that anonymous setting after you've set it. So, well, once students have turned in an assignment. So if you do it accidentally, then you just have to kind of live with it. And this may not be relevant for some instructors because you'd want to make sure that your students don't put their name on their work if you're intentionally trying to grade it anonymously, because you can very easily tell who it was, and that defeats the purpose. In my previous classes in web design, I would have students create custom websites that was very obvious who they were. So it didn't work for me to use anonymous grading because I had to actually look at a work product that was very unique to each individual student. So this is not necessarily going to be something that works for everybody. Let's see, we don't need to worry about special access. So we have some options that we want to choose here. I'm not going to do a category. File submission is the preferable type. Unlimited, no restrictions. And then for evaluation and feedback, if I wanted to add that rubric, I could. If I wanted to create a new one, I could. I'm going to throw in this drawing assignment rubric just as a lark. And this is what you're looking for that we're currently talking about, is the anonymous marking. Hide student names during assessment. And I'm going to go ahead and say that this is out of 5 points. And it's going to create it in the grade book. Yeah, and I think that sounds good. And I don't want a due date and instructions. Obviously, you want more thorough instructions, and we're going to go ahead and save. And oh, actually, you know what? I need to. No, okay. Save and close, and then make visible to students. So what you'll notice here is this icon right here with person silhouette with a question mark means that anonymous marking is enabled. And so when I impersonate a student to turn in that assignment, I see the rubric. I want to add a file. Let me pull up an example. Test homework, here we go. And submit it. And the student gets their email confirmation, and we get to grade an assignment. So now when I go to view submissions, anonymous user evaluate. And so now I don't know who has turned this in unless they put their name on their document. and they didn't. So I can go ahead and grade this by clicking on my rubric, choosing my scales. You'll notice that the rubric looks different. They have a different theme for doing the rubric here. It's presented sort of in a more user-friendly mode this way, but yeah, so you get to choose how it applies, and great job. And I don't know who this was, but you'll notice I can't hit publish. And it's like, oh, hey, what's going on? And if you mouse over it, it'll tell you use the publish all function or button found in assignments when using anonymous marking. Because if I publish this now, if it allowed me to, then it would have that student's grade show up in this column, and I would know who I just graded. So it's defeats the purpose if I can just publish one and then go look at the grade book and I'm like, oh, that was George's work. Now I know who I just graded or whatever. And you could go back and edit it if you had some sort of bias against George. So it defeats the purpose to be able to do that. So basically what you do with anonymous grading is you save your draft, and then once you're done, then you would publish all. So you basically just leave everything as draft saved until all students have submitted their assignments. It does create kind of a problem when you have students that turn in assignments late, because you know who hasn't turned in the assignment, and if you're giving them an extension. So it's not a perfect system, but yeah, that's at least one consideration that you have. With any kind of equitable grading system, the significant aspect, and this is true of any grading system, regardless of whether you're trying to emulate what we're showing here in this workshop, you want the students to be aware of what they're being graded on and how they're being graded. So all of this should be reflected in your syllabus, or an accompanying document relating to your grading system. They should know in advance. You should have your grade items created in the grade book in advance so that they're able to see them. I don't recommend using date restrictions on the visibility of grade items. You can use date restrictions on the assignments, discussions, and quizzes if you want to hide them before they should be visible. But with managed grades, I generally don't recommend editing anything in the restrictions tab to hide them. I don't like start dates and end dates for grade items. Students should be able to see them from the get-go, so they see what they're being graded on. One argument against that may be that they don't want students to be overwhelmed. I have had some instructors who adjust quite a bit every term, so they'll have 1,000, and that's an exaggeration, but 1,000 assignments, and then they'll cut down on the ones that they don't want to do, which I find that very chaotic, and I don't generally recommend it myself, but some people have been doing that. I think it's usually better that everybody know in advance what they're looking forward to in the term, and how much points everything is worth, so they know how to focus their energy, especially if they get into a crunch and need to finish assignments that are worth more than other smaller assignments or something like that. Which is something that I've specifically experienced in my own classes. Is I'll have students that get behind, whether it's a personal life issue or they just got distracted with other classes or whatever, and I'll have to redirect them and say, like, so the assignments that you're trying to do are only worth 5 points, whereas this bigger assignment that you're ignoring is worth 50 points. You might want to focus on that one because you're going to get more points out of it and have a better chance of passing the class. So that's definitely something to be aware of. I have some resources to share that I'm going to be able to post into the chat, but at this point, I think we can open it up and have anybody ask any questions if you have any particular ideas coming up. Looks like Deb has raised her hand first.
Thanks, Michael. I really appreciate it. So is there anything when you're setting up in the syllabus, you know, like I've been using the point system forever, and, you know, I have my 90% or how many points is an A, et cetera. Is there anything you do differently with this system?
Basically, you just want to do something similar to this kind of graphic that I created is what I would recommend, where you can give them a visual representation of what your grade scheme looks like. just to show them, hey, you have these 3 out of 5 possibilities for passing grade. And technically you could even do a 100-point scale version of the 5-point scale. It's just that every 20% is a different grade item rather than the first 70 are an F or a D or F and D, sorry. So yeah, so I would do some kind of visual that shows them the scale, which is what we generally have in our syllabi template.
So sort of along that line, sorry, it's like after lunch and I'm a little not clear,
Oh, that's
but
right.
if let's say I have 10 learning activities and 3 of them are what would be a traditional assignment, 2 of them are discussions. Are each of them a potential 5, regardless of what the work is, and then so that everything is equivalent? I'm just a little
That is
stuck there.
how the art department has been doing their assignments. Everything is out of 5.
Okay.
So everything was equivalent in value. And that is a question that has come up before. And so that is something that you technically can do a mixed grade scheme where you can have a percentage grade item in addition to a 5-point scale. If you have something that you think needs to be different, and it doesn't have to be percentage, it could also be this complete incomplete. So if it's something that's really low risk, and it's just I want to make sure my students are doing this assignment, but their actual achieved grade is not excessively relevant, whether they got an A or a B on it, or a 5 or a 4, you can even make that just a complete incomplete.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I think Krista was next.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for this. This is really helpful. I'm in the art department now at Cascade, but this is my first term. I have a question regarding how this is doing the calculation for the final grade. That was like a little bit unclear to me. Is that point?
Yeah, so I haven't actually set up the final grade to reflect this.
Oh, great. Thank you.
So yeah, no, so that could be definitely confusing. So ultimately you can set the final grade to have its own calculation. But really this is something that I don't actually remember how the art department has been doing this. But ultimately what you can do is you can make it so that the grade scheme comes out to be this, the 5, 3 for the final grade. It's still adding up all of the grade items into a total. In this case, it's the 1 from the complete, 1 from the complete, 5 here and 5 here. So that's where you get this 12 total. But it's still dividing that up into the 5-point scale. And so you really don't want to look at the numbers here. You want to look at the background color, because that's actually what it's doing. But we can, oops, I hit the wrong one. But you can actually edit the display options. And this is something that's really common because people will complain. Sorry, I'm going to go back for 1 second. People will complain that they're only seeing the numbers in their final grade calculations, but you can actually go in here and set up all of the options so that you see the 5 here and the 3 here. So it's taking this and doing the math for you and putting it into this grade scheme. The reason that it's doing the 5-point grade scheme here is because in the grade schemes, I had set this to the default. If you leave this as the default, it's going to show you the percentage grades. And so that is where it can become important to make sure that you do set the 5-point scale as the default in your grade book. But again, you have to create this in advance of choosing that option because it won't be there by default.
Is there a way to like, do I have to have that created before I can create any assignments, or?
It would be preferable to do it that way, yeah.
Okay.
Because if you create you can create your assignments without assigning a grade item to them.
Great.
And then retroactively create a grade item. It's really two different ways of doing the same thing. So you can actually, and this is what I do when I create a new course, is I will create the grade items by themselves here by just hitting new and grade item and creating categories and stuff like that. And then later on, when I have an assignment that I'm creating, then I'll just attach it to the one that's currently already in existence over here in the grade book. That being said, if you are creating the grade item here, I mean, sorry, the new assignment here, you can tell it that you want a new grade item and it will create one for you. So it's really two options. It's whatever your workflow preference is. Personally, I like to do sort of a machine process where you do all of one thing at one time. So create all the grade items at one time and then create all the assignments at one time and so on and so forth. And then you just associate the things that already exist. But if you choose that, you would want to create the grades before the assignments and discussions and quizzes, because then you'd still have to go back after creating grade items to link them up. So you might as well just create the grade items first and save yourself the trouble from having to go back.
Gotcha. Okay. I think I'm just I'm trying to wrap my head around how the final grade comes out in terms of like submitting the grades.
Yeah, so it's a matter of the system is doing the grade calculation for you based on the total possible points of all of the grade items that you have, which is like, for instance, this 12 possible points that this particular student is looking at. This is a mixed grading system with the complete incomplete, which is why you're having 12 instead of a 5, 10 multiples of 5 final possible grade. If you only do 5-point scales, then your grade's going to be a division of that, of 35 or 100 or however many grade items you have, adding up to a multiple of 5. That being said, this can be overwhelming, as you're probably experiencing. So I would definitely recommend contacting an ITS and having us work with you just to make sure that we get all of your questions clarified.
Okay, great. Thank
Practical
you.
sense in your actual shell. It's a lot easier than looking at it abstractly at an example like this.
Excellent. Are you available on Fridays?
I am.
Excellent.
So,
Okay,
yeah.
great. Thank you.
Wendy?
Yeah, I have a question about the rubric. So I haven't used rubrics
Yes.
before, and I know it's like, so you had 4 different, in the example, 4 different categories in your rubric, and each one of those could be 1 to 5. So how does how do you tell the D2L how you want the final grade based on that rubric determined?
So for that one, it does the calculation again. So if you have 20 possible points, because you have 4 items that are each worth 5 points, it's just going to do the math and divide it up into a 5-point scale for you.
So it's just averaged basically, or you're just like, everyone has to be the same weight. Every item, every rubric item has to have the same weight as every other item.
In that system, technically you don't have to, though, because there is an option to do custom points. So you could have, for example, a rubric that, let me get into that. So you can actually create custom points. I don't recommend it because it gets confusing, but it is possible. Actually, you know what? I think the other one has an example of custom points. So I'm just gonna go there. Yeah, so this discussion rubric has custom points. So this one's doing 1.5 and 0 as the 3 possible outcomes for grammar and word count. However, adherence to prompts is 2, 1, and 0.
Right.
Or 2, 1, and 0.5. So you can do custom grade schemes. I think it just makes it more confusing. So it's preferable, but it may not work for what you really want, because you may have criteria where you give them a point for putting their name on it, and that's obviously not going to be as valuable of a criteria as actually doing the real work on the assignment.
So but that's the way you would weight it, is you by choosing that, okay, 1 point for putting your name on it, 6 points for doing the problem correctly,
Yeah, if that's the way you want to do it. So you would choose custom points instead of just regular points when you're creating the scoring system.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah. And Allison, I noticed you're here. Did you have anything you wanted to add? Allison's was my partner in creating this workshop.
No, I just thought I would pop in and learn more. Yeah, thanks.
All right, any other questions? Looks like Paul has his hand up.
Michael, Laura has
Yeah,
something in the
thank you,
chat, too,
Michael.
that I can-
A question just to kind of carry over from what you're showing us now. You did show in the assignment for when you were doing the grading the anonymous assignment, how
Mhm.
that rubric appeared as little check marks along
Yes.
the right-hand side. You said that was specific to that class or however that was set up. Is that easy to do, or how did you do that?
Setting
Thanks.
this up, yeah. So that's just a matter of setting up a new rubric in advance of creating the assignment and then choosing that rubric. You can actually create it when you create the assignment, but I don't recommend that. It's not very fun. It's usually good to know what you're doing in advance and then choose that. The rubrics tool has come a long way. I used to do rubrics trainings. I really hated it because it was just really complicated and difficult to explain, but they've made it so much easier in the last several years. I think it's been about 4 years since they revised the rubric tool. But basically, you get to name the levels. I think you might have seen on the previous example for the discussion rubric is that there was like good, fair, and poor. But you can name these whatever you want, and they can even be 5 points if you want to call it that. And maybe do another column for 5. But yeah, so the rubrics are pretty easy to set up. The more difficult thing is the decision on which you want your rubric criteria and levels to be, and all of the feedback, filling in all of these boxes, saying exactly what you expect of students and how you differentiate the achievement of different levels. That's the bulk of the work when it comes to the rubric, and then the rest is just filling it in. You'll notice we didn't use the initial feedback boxes, but you can actually fill these in with responses, sort of reflecting what the description of a criteria level would be. So let me exit out of that and I'll show you an example under the discussion rubric. So we have few to no spelling errors, no mechanical errors, any errors are minor, et cetera, et cetera. And so for the initial feedback, if you wanted to use this, this is for pre-filled feedback that everybody's going to see if they achieve this level. So it may not be that important to you to fill these out at all if you like to do a lot of custom feedback. But this may be something that, and you can do it optionally, you can do it for different levels. So maybe this person is great. They have no grammar word count issues whatsoever. So you don't even need to say, it's basically you just be saying great job, and maybe that's superfluous. But maybe the person who's having problems with it is the one that needs the kind of generic feedback saying like, and you can type anything you want here, talking about like, hey, here's some resources. If you're having some spelling mechanical errors, here's how to use spell check. If you need to talk to a writing tutor about opportunities to get your writings reviewed in advance of turning in an assignment, here's the e-tutoring online tutoring service for that if you don't want to go to a campus, that sort of thing. So you could fill up the feedback boxes however you like with the pertinent responses that you'd like to give to everybody who achieves that level. But yeah, filling out the rubric is pretty much mostly just about figuring it out in advance and then just filling it in. The math is actually the thing that most seems to annoy non-math instructors. And if you're having trouble with that, I recommend contacting an ITS and we can help you go through that.
Stay there, would you?
Yes.
If we're ready to go on, but if Paul still has other things he wants to ask.
Thank you, Deb. I think, the question then becomes, how then does it automatically appear as you demonstrated when you were showing the assessment of the anonymized assignment, where then the criteria within the rubric appear as just line items as you are evaluating work within your assessment or your grading?
Yeah.
So that's my follow-up question, and Deb, that you may be asking something.
Yeah, it's just the just a different way of displaying the exact same thing that we're looking at here. So it's basically that just instead of clicking on a box like you would from the grade book, if you were grading it manually from the grade book, when you're grading in the assignment interface just has a scale. So instead of clicking on a single box to choose which item.
Okay.
It's just that sliding scale, but it's literally reflecting the exact same thing that you created in the rubric. It's just, I think they decided for their fancier revision to the assignments grading tool, they just changed up how it looks. I'm sure based on some feedback that they received. But yeah,
Okay.
functionally it's the same. It's just slightly different in the way that it works or it looks.
Okay. Thanks. And thanks, Deb.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question on it looked like in that discussion rubric you had that you had a separate section for the responses.
Yeah, so that wasn't my example. That was just one that was in there. So I didn't create this discussion rubric.
I was just curious because yeah, I was curious what it looks like because I usually have just one of my criterias focused on responses, but this is grading each reply separately.
Yes, so you
like.
can
Okay.
create this however you like. You can actually do separate ones.
Okay.
So this is an example I stole from Allison. I don't know if she got it from an actual instructor. I imagine she probably did. But this is initial post, reply 1 and reply 2 in that scenario where a lot of instructors will require students to reply to 2 other students after making their initial post. So this would allow you to grade those individually, whereas some instructors might just create a more simple rubric that has, you could make it so that maybe one criteria is the first post, and then the second criteria and the third criteria are the responses, if you wanted to do it that way. But you'd be basically combining all of these different types of criteria into one category of saying like, well, you met the word count and you adhered to the prompt and you demonstrated clear and innovative thinking, that sort of thing. So it's just how you choose to do it. Some instructors might not like to have to click so many boxes, so maybe they want to make it smaller and simpler.
Great, thanks.
All right, any other questions? We're running out of time here. I will just emphasize again, if you want to follow up with anything on this, I'm available, but other instructional technology specialists may be able to help you with this as well. So reach out, and yeah, thank you for coming.